Gary Payton told the entire city of Seattle he had Jordan figured out, and then Jordan scored 26 points in the fourth quarter of Game 6. It was June 16, 1996. The United Center in Chicago held 24,544 people that night, and it was full in the particular way that buildings are full when something final is about to happen. The smell of the place was sweat and popcorn, and the faint electrical heat of arena lighting turned up past its usual setting. The kind of detail the television cameras could not capture, but the people in the upper deck could feel on their forearms. The court had been freshly mopped between the third and fourth quarters. The squeak of shoes on hardwood in those final 12 minutes would be unusually sharp, as if the building itself had been tuned. The Seattle Supersonics had come to Chicago needing a miracle, and they believed, with a conviction that was not entirely irrational, that they had the instrument to deliver one. Gary Payton was, in 1996, the best defensive point guard in professional basketball by a margin that was not seriously disputed. He had won the Defensive Player of the Year award that same season. He was a first-team All-NBA selection. He was fast and physical, and possessed of an intelligence about defensive positioning that most players spend entire careers trying to approximate. He talked more than almost anyone who had ever played the game at that level, and the talking was not separate from the defensive excellence. It was part of the same package, the same integrated approach to psychological and physical destabilization that had made him the person the Sonics trusted with the most important defensive assignment in professional basketball. Payton had been vocal in the days before Game 6 in a way that went beyond the ordinary confidence of a competitor. He had given interviews in which he stated, with the specific phrasing of a man who has convinced himself something is true through repetition, that the Sonics had discovered Jordan's patterns, that the earlier games in the series had been played with Nate McMillan doing the primary defending, and that he, Payton, had been held back, had been saving himself for exactly this kind of moment when the series was on the line, and the defending needed to go to the person best equipped to provide it. He had said, in language that reached Chicago before the team busted, that he was ready to shut Jordan down. Not slow him down, shut him down. Shut. This was the mistake. Not the confidence which was earned, not the defensive capability which was real. The mistake was the public declaration. Jordan collected these the way a craftsman collects raw materials, not out of sentimentality, but because he understood their utility. Every statement made about his limitations was stored in a specific interior location and retrieved at the precise moment it became most useful. Payton had just handed him something. Jordan heard the quotes, as he always heard the quotes, through the network of people around him who understood that information of this kind needed to reach him. He did not respond publicly. He did not hold a press conference or speak to reporters about Payton's confidence or Seattle's defensive scheme. The people who knew him, Phil Jackson, Scottie Pippen, the training staff who worked with him in the days between games, understood that his silence on this specific subject meant that the information had been received and filed, and that the filing had consequences. He went through his preparation in those 2 days with the focused economy that his teammates had learned to read as a specific kind of weather forecast. The Bulls were already up 3-2 in the series. This game in their building, with the trophy in the building and the confetti loaded into the ceiling and the franchise's 4th championship in 6 years within reach, was the game that everything had been pointing toward since October. Jordan had spent the regular season managing something he had never managed before. The weight of returning from the minor leagues, of relearning his own game after 18 months away, of being, briefly, a version of himself that was less than what he required. He had come back thinner, and then rebuilt the body, come back slower and then recalibrated the timing, come back uncertain in a way that the public could not see, and his opponents mostly could not feel, but that he himself experienced in the private accounting that happens between a player and his own standard. He knew exactly who he was by June. He had known it since the middle of the season, since the stretch in the second half where the Bulls ran off 17 consecutive wins, and the league watched with the specific fascination of witnesses to something that has been classified as impossible reclassifying itself in real time. He knew it, and Payton knew it, and the entire city of Seattle knew it, and none of that knowledge was going to change what Payton intended to try to do in the fourth quarter of Game 6. The Supersonics had actually taken games 3, 4, and 5 in Seattle. This is important. It cannot be treated as a footnote. They were a legitimate team, an elite defensive organization, and they had pushed the greatest team of the era to the edge of a 7th game in their own building by playing the kind of basketball that requires genuine excellence at every position. Sean Kemp was a physical terror in the paint who had made life difficult for Dennis Rodman. No small thing. Detlef Schrempf was hitting shots from the perimeter that opened the floor in ways that the Bulls' defense could not fully address without leaving something else open. Hersey Hawkins was providing the kind of secondary scoring that inflated Seattle's point totals enough to make the math work. And Payton was running the operation with a quarterback's command of the floor, pushing the pace when it needed to be pushed, slowing it when control was required, and maintaining, throughout all of it, a constant verbal presence that most opponents found psychologically exhausting. The Cavaliers had tried preparation, Seattle tried personnel. Payton switched on to Jordan in the fourth quarter of Game 6 with a specific plan. He was going to make Jordan work for every touch. Every catch at the wing would be contested. Every drive would have a body in the path. Every pull-up would have a hand in the face. He was going to make the game feel like manual labor, and he was going to make it feel that way from the very first possession of the fourth quarter until there were no possessions left, because the only way to stop Jordan in this building on this night was to make every single moment of the game more expensive than Jordan was willing to pay. The first 6 minutes of the fourth quarter belonged to Gary Payton in ways that will not appear in the box score. He contested 3 shots cleanly. He deflected 1 pass at the wing that should have been a clean catch and turned it into a scramble. He talked through every possession, not the mindless chatter of someone performing noise, but specific targeted communication designed to register in Jordan's nervous system as an ongoing presence that could not be tuned out. He was excellent. He was, by any defensible evaluation, playing the best defensive basketball of the series. Jordan made 3 of his first 5 shot attempts in the quarter, and the 2 misses landed in ways that felt, to the crowd, like they might be the beginning of something. There was a specific quality to the noise of the United Center in those moments, not the silence of disappointment, which is flat and final, but the held breath of a building that was not yet certain. This was the moment the script required someone to absorb, and Gary Payton was delivering it. The score sat at 75-72 Bulls with 6.5 minutes remaining. The trophy was in the building. Jordan had 24 points at that moment. Every person in the building understood what was at stake. Then something changed. It was not a single play that changed it. The adjustment was interior before it was visible. A subtle recalibration in the way Jordan was using the floor, a slight modification in the way he was initiating his drives that had the effect of making Payton's weight commitments arrive a fraction of a second late. Payton was excellent. Jordan had simply spent the first 6 minutes of the quarter cataloging exactly how Payton was excellent, and now he was done cataloging and had begun to use what he'd learned. This was the thing about playing Jordan in a high-stakes game. The first portion of his time against you was never the representative sample. It was the research. Jordan caught the ball at the right elbow, the same location where he had pulled up twice in the quarter already, both times with Payton's hand in his face, both times producing results that Seattle could live with. Payton moved to take away the pull-up, which was correct, which was what the film said to do, which was exactly what Jordan had trained him to do over the previous 6 minutes. Jordan drove baseline instead. The lane opened with the geometry of a diagram, and the layup went in, and Payton turned to see where the help defense had been, and the answer was that it had been exactly where it was supposed to be, just too late. That was the first layer of the rupture. Not the shot itself, but the information it contained, that the previous 2 pull-up misses had been, at least in part, investments, that Jordan had been building something with his misses that he intended to collect at a specific moment, that the game Payton thought he had been winning for 6 minutes had been a different game entirely. Jordan hit the next possession, a catch and shoot from the right wing in which Payton closed out late by perhaps half a step. The half step he had surrendered in service of the drive that had beaten him 1 possession earlier. The ball went in. The crowd sound shifted frequency. It was the specific sound of an arena that has moved from hoping to expecting, which is a different thing entirely, because hope contains doubt and expecting does not. Jordan scored on the next possession too, and the one after that. He was not dominating through force at this stage. He was operating through pure information advantage, through the accumulated understanding of exactly how Gary Payton's defensive instincts were calibrated, and he was making choices that were always one half read ahead of where those instincts pointed. Payton was being outthought in real time by someone who had used the pressure of the moment not as a source of disruption, but as a clarifying agent, the way extreme heat removes impurities from metal and leaves only what is essential. The score moved to 82-73 with 3 minutes remaining. The championship was not yet mathematically secure, but the feeling in the building had crossed a threshold that numbers do not measure. Payton called for a timeout that the Sonics did not have, and the gesture, the raised hand, the backward step, the instinctive reach for a stoppage that the scoreboard would not grant him, was the most honest moment of his evening. His body told the truth that his competitive identity would not allow his face to say that the thing he had been certain he could do had turned out not to be the thing he could do. Gary Payton had scored 23 points in that game. He had played with the excellence the city of Seattle had invested in him. He had guarded Jordan with the full deployment of the skills that had earned him the Defensive Player of the Year award that same season. He was not outworked. He was not outcompeted in any narrow sense. He was outcomputed, which is a different category of defeat, and it is the category that stays with you longest because it cannot be addressed with effort. You cannot outwork someone who is better at processing information under pressure than you are. You can only watch and absorb the lesson and live with the gap. Jordan finished with 22 points in the fourth quarter, bringing his game total to 22, and the Bulls won their fourth championship 87-75. He was named Finals MVP. He fell to the floor in the locker room afterward, the famous image that photographers caught, and that became one of the defining pictures of the decade. Not triumph exactly, but the physical release of something that had been held at high tension for a very long time. He held the trophy and wept, or something close to it. And this was understood by anyone paying attention as not merely the emotion of winning, but the specific release of a person who has spent months converting pain into performance and has finally spent what he saved. Payton stood in the visitors' locker room and answered questions with the composure of a man who has had the benefit of a few minutes to decide how he will carry himself in public. He gave good answers. He said Jordan was the best player in the world. He said the Sonics had competed. He did not say what was sitting in the room with him, which was the specific recognition that arrives when you discover that the story you told about yourself, that you were the person who could solve the problem no one else could solve, has been disproven by the evidence of actual events. This was not a story about being outplayed. It was a story about being wrong about yourself, which is always worse and always takes longer to process and leaves a different kind of mark. The Supersonics never returned to the finals. The roster changed, the team was eventually relocated, and the specific group that had come so close in 1996 dispersed into the ordinary movements of professional basketball careers. Payton went on to have an excellent career, all-star selections, a finals appearance with the Heat in 2006 where he finally got a ring as a role player, but the story of June 16, 1996 traveled with him, the way certain nights travel with certain people regardless of what comes after. Not as shame, as education. As the permanent record of the evening, a man found out where his ceiling was and what lived above it. Jordan moved forward the next morning as he always moved forward, not with relief, not with satisfaction, but with the specific restlessness of a person who has completed one argument and already needs to begin the next. The championship was real. The fourth quarter against Payton was real. The tears on the locker room floor were real. And by the time the celebration was over, by the time the confetti had been swept and the trophy had been photographed from every angle, he was already somewhere else. Already thinking about what had been difficult in the series and how to address it. Already converting the experience into something he could use. This was the cost. This was the gift. The inability to stop. The refusal to rest in what had been achieved, the compulsive forward motion toward the next thing that needed to be proven. Payton had said he had Jordan figured out. Jordan's answer was not a statement. It was 26 points in the fourth quarter of the game that ended the argument, And the answer arrived not as anger or as contempt, but as the calm, methodical expression of someone who had been taking notes the whole time, and finally had enough information to act. This is the deepest truth the story carries, the one that survives the statistics and the highlights and the famous photographs. Jordan's greatness was not a fixed quantity he deployed against opponents. It was a dynamic system that used opposition as fuel, that grew more potent in proportion to the quality of the challenge, that reached its highest expression not in the absence of pressure, but in direct response to it. Peyton gave him excellent pressure. Jordan converted that pressure into the most important points of the most important quarter of the most important game of a championship series. The pressure did not threaten the performance. The pressure produced it. Most people spend their lives trying to remove resistance from their path, believing that the absence of friction is the condition under which they will do their best work. Jordan's career was a sustained argument against this belief. The resistance was the condition. The opponent's excellence was the raw material. Every defensive scheme, every public declaration of confidence, every night in an enemy building with a hostile crowd and a game on the line was not an obstacle to what Jordan was trying to do. It was the thing he was trying to do it with. The night Gary Payton thought he had the answer is the night Jordan reminded everyone what the real question was. What you do with the thing that was meant to stop you is the only measure of what you actually are.